Today we're making a workout bench that goes from flat to a 30-degree incline. This project only requires basic power tools. All the cuts required can be done with a circular saw, and I started by just ripping some strips of 3/4 inch plywood guided by my Kreg straight edge guide. These angled rulers are pretty handy. I set it to 60 degrees, drew a line, and then cut along that line. A compound miter saw would make this a little easier, but a good circular saw and a steady hand will do the job. I want the two benches to be the exact same height, so I cut a scrap piece of MDF to use as a spacer as I laid out the pieces of the frames. I was very careful with the vertical pieces that sit in between the two horizontal pieces, but I'm able to overcut the layer that goes on top because I can flush trim that later. These trapezoidal frames have half lap joints and are made of 2 layers of 3/4 inch plywood. I sanded the edges before assembling the frames just because it's going to be a little bit more tricky to sand the insides of them once they're assembled. I like that you don't need a lot of expensive clamps for this project, and I used mostly these small $1 spring clamps, and then occasionally worked in some larger $4 spring clamps and a couple F-styles. The trickiest piece to cut was the vertical support at the sharp 30-degree angle. But if you're nervous about getting a straight line, you can always overcut it by about 1/16 of an inch, and then sand flush to the line. For these supports, I just glued them up without even trimming the longer piece. I'll just wait till it's all assembled, and then trim and router it flush. The bottom horizontal part of the frame is kind of short, so for the vertical support, I just cut the overlapping piece to 60 degrees, because that's going to make it real easy to take one of my offcuts and fill in this last piece. Now I just have to trim the overlaps. I used a jigsaw, but you could use a circular saw. And then I used my palm router with a flush trim bit to even up the layers of plywood. I hit the frame with a roundover bit just to give the piece a nicer hand feel before sanding everything to 220 grit with my Orbital sander. I'm going to use 3/8 inch bolts to connect the two trapezoidal pieces together, and I drilled initial pilot holes about 1/4 inch in diameter before stacking the frames and drilling the full 3/8 inch diameter holes. The bench tops and bottoms are going to be connected to the frames with pocket holes, and after cutting the pieces to length using my portable CrossCut, I used my Kreg 720 Pro to drill these nice angled holes. Driving the first set of screws in was easy, but I needed my right angle attachment to drive in the second set. There's lots of ways you can fill in pocket holes. You can use dowels, wood putty, but in this case, I'm just gluing another panel over them. I did a full double thick panel for the bottoms, but for the tops to conserve this really nice Europly from Columbia Forest Products, I just did small panels to cover up where the pocket holes were. The smaller trapezoid is 3 1/16 of an inch narrower than the big one, which allows it to slide right in between. Now I can take those holes that I drilled and use them to align the holes in the smaller trapezoid. A little more palm routing to just make sure I have no sharp edges, and another once over with the Orbital sander to clean everything up. I'm using a water-based polyurethane to provide a protective finish, and I went with 2 coats with a light sanding of 220 grit in between. I had some scraps of Kaizen foam that was about 1 inch thick. It's closed cell, inexpensive, and has a good firmness to it. And I just cut pieces with my Kiwi knife to use for the padded bench tops. I took some 1/2 inch plywood, cut some leather, and now I'm just going to fold the leather over the Kaizen foam and then use my Ryobi staple gun to connect the leather to the 1/2 inch plywood. This staple gun's pretty awesome. This is a quick and easy way to make leather cushions. I'm sure there's better ways, but this only took me about 15 to 20 minutes, and the only tricky part is around the corners, but here's how I do it. I want to be able to remove the leather pads, but I also don't want them just to slide off the trapezoids. So I drilled some shallow holes and recessed some rare earth magnets that have a hole in the middle, and that also come with a steel jacket, which just keeps them from being too brittle. On the underside of the leather bench, I added a piece of 1/4 inch plywood to cover up the staples, and drilled holes in that layer as well, so I could add more magnets that were flush. Now, the magnets can stick to the other magnets. These galvanized bolts and 3/8 inch wing nuts are nice and secure, but I wanted to create a better decorative handle to easily pull them in and out. So I melted down some tin and bismuth alloys, poured them into a silicone mold, and made some nice Boba Fett headed bolts. When I teased this project on Instagram, a few folks suggested that it would take way too long to change the bench from flat to a 30-degree incline. So here's an unedited clip of me making that transition, and while time can be a relative concept to a lot of people, I don't feel like less than a minute is that big of a deal. This is just the latest piece going into my mid-century modern modular plywood home gym that's going to share space with my office. That's why I tried to make it look nice. And I still got a couple more pieces in progress. Let me know what you think in the comment section below and what additional functionality I could add to this bench. Thanks. Bye.